Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, everybody. It's Mark Graban here. Welcome to the podcast. It's episode 469 for February 22nd, 2023. I'm joined today by Matt May and Pablo Dominguez. You'll learn more about them in a minute, but they are authors of the new book. And by new, I mean it was released yesterday, What a Unicorn Knows. So one of the themes there, and I think this episode has a little bit of something for everybody. One of their themes is constant experimentation, whether you are Toyota, a startup, or something in between. So I hope you'll listen whether you are doing continuous improvement in a larger organization, or if you are an entrepreneur or a devotee of the lean startup methodology. I hope you enjoy the episode. For links and more information, you can go to leanblog.org/469. I'm joined today by Matt May and Pablo Dominguez. They are the authors of a new book. I have a copy here for those who are watching on YouTube. What a Unicorn Knows: How Leading Entrepreneurs Use Lean Principles to Drive Sustainable Growth. Matt has been here before a couple of times, episodes 67 and 103. We've done a couple of video podcasts, which I don't think ended up in the audio podcast. And he was also my guest for episode 39 of My Favorite Mistake. And Pablo is here for the first time. So before I tell you a little bit more about them, first off, welcome to the podcast, Matt and Pablo. How are you?
Thank you.
Thank you. And good to see you again, Mark.
I was trying to search, Matt. I feel like it hasn't been that long since we've done an episode, but that may well be the case. We've done episodes about some of your previous books. But
I think the last thing was My Favorite Mistake.
Right. And that was maybe about 18 months ago. But I'll put links to those past episodes in the show notes. But let me first tell you a little bit more about Pablo Dominguez. He is an operating partner at Insight Partners, a leading global venture capital and private equity firm that invests in high growth technology and software scale-up companies, as they call them. And we'll talk about that term today. Companies that are driving transformative change in their industries. So Pablo has spent his entire career as a go-to-market and sales-focused operator. He's worked in consulting, public companies, startups, and most recently, these companies they refer to as ScaleUps. And that includes using the application of lean principles to help drive sustainable growth. And we're definitely going to talk about that a lot today. And Matt May leads Lean Scale-Up program at Insight Partners, working with Pablo. So Matt has a long mastery of lean principles and methodologies. He spent nearly a decade inside Toyota, where he played an integral part in launching the University of Toyota, which was their corporate university dedicated to teaching, preserving, and expanding the Toyota way. Matt is previously the author of many great books. I'm going to say countless, but they are literally countable. But a couple of those are The Elegant Solution and most recently, Winning the Brain Game. So you've got the new book, again, What a Unicorn Knows. We're going to get to know Pablo and Matt and how you came to work together a little bit here. So Pablo, since it's your first time here, I like to hit guests with this lean origin story. I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. Well, my lean origin story starts with Matt May. Matt and I have been working together for 11 years. I was lucky enough to work with him at a public company 11 years ago, where he helped us solve a lot of our issues within the sales organization. And then given the success we had there over multiple years, we worked together at a startup I was at after that, working both in sales, post-sales services, and HR, solving issues there. And then I joined Insight Partners about 4.5 years ago, and couldn't imagine not leveraging Matt's skills. So Matt's been helping us here at Insight really tackle a lot of the growth challenges that our portfolio companies may have, and applying lean to those. So really excited to share a lot of what we've been working on.
Yeah. And I want to ask, going back to some of those early days, what was the context of the role you were in at the time, Pablo? What resonated with you about lean in general?
Yeah, and I think this is why we wrote the book. So I was running global business operations for a Fortune 250 company, supporting around 8,000 salespeople, 12 business units. And most of lean is bred in, manufacturing or in product development. And what Matt and I have been able to do is sort of flip that and apply it to the go-to-market lens, right? And so in that example in the public company, we basically look to streamline the quote to cash process, right? So as a lead comes into marketing, gets converted into an opportunity in sales, gets closed, and then, goes to implementation and a customer starts getting value. That process over time, as any company, as you add more people, technology, there's technical debt, becomes fraught with waste. And so Matt helped us really identify how to remove a lot of that waste to decrease the time to value, which was really transformational. So love that we've been able to apply it more to the marketing and sales and post-sales lens versus the traditional lens that most people are used to.
Yeah. Now, Matt, let me bounce it over to you. I mean, what Pablo said there sounds almost exactly like the old Taiichi Ohno line, something to the effect of all we're doing is trying to reduce the time between receiving the order and receiving cash. Is that directionally correct? Or tell me more about that idea of just compressing that time.
It's not only directionally correct, it's literally correct.
Okay.
It's one of the stories that I don't think gets told much in much of the traditional lean literature, but having worked in the sales and marketing arm of Toyota, it was a story I think we heard more often than our counterparts in the I don't know, parts distribution, the production side of the business. And I always sort of called it the dirty little secret that this was all about getting cash in the door. And what's the easiest way to do that? What's the shortest route to doing that? What's the cheapest, most cost-effective way of doing that? Because Toyota sort of sprang from the dust and rubble, at least in the car part of their business following World War II, didn't have a lot of resources. And I've kind of maintained that genetics all the way through. But I just thought that I think one of the first things I said to Pablo and his team those 11 years ago, when I took them through the official University of Toyota lean simulation, which to this day we use with tech forward companies, I said, here's the secret. It is not about quality, cost, speed. It's really about shortening that, order to cash. And we use quote to cash, it's kind of a Salesforce kind of nomenclature, but it is the driving force. So directionally, we're just sort of trying to take a whole company approach to that mentality here, because the context that the gap in the marketplace when it comes to lean is that go-to-market, kind of pointy end of the spear, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And that's just hasn't really been tackled.
Yeah. So then coming back to your story, Matt, in recent years, how did you come to work formally? We've heard kind of Pablo's side of past experiences and wanting to bring you in. What's your perspective on starting to work together and being part of Insight Partners?
I have followed Pablo in every time he's gone someplace. He's looked around, as a good leader does, and basically says, things are good, but I know they can be better. And one of the things I think that makes us work well together is the fact that we're both operationally minded. I'm a practitioner. He's a practitioner. We don't necessarily study the problem as like a scholar would. We look at it from the business perspective, the business lens, and how can we apply things that would work, that are field tested, that gets everyone involved. So it's not just like a consulting, that traditional, conventional consulting assignment, arm's length. Let me tap your brain, feed back to you all your best ideas. Let's pull them out of the people doing the work. And that is just, that's part and parcel to the lean approach anyway.
Right. No, it's a familiar mindset, like you were describing there. And Pablo, let me turn it to you. I'd be curious to hear your recollections of that lean simulation, because as Matt had a lot of experience even back at Toyota, kind of bringing TPS outside of the factory walls. I mean, I'd be curious to hear your reaction to say, "Oh, we're going to do a Toyota simulation." Like, how did you experience that and see the connections then to the work that you were doing?
Yeah, so I've had the benefit of now sitting in those simulations maybe 40 times since I've been with Matt. And the first time, though, you're kind of like, what's going on here? The guys got tables set up with little cars and parts, and your first thought in a tech forward company is like, we don't manufacture widgets, right? So, all right, this will be a cool exercise. But the exercise is actually pretty eye-opening, right? Because regardless of what you create as ultimate value, the intent is to show before what something was like, process, right? Rife with complete inefficiencies, to then an end state, which you go, wow, what an elegant solution. How could they not have thought of that before, right? And so Matt has a very good way of, taking you on the journey from like first step to letting people come up with their own solutions to then showing the output and getting the audience in the mindset of, okay, now how do I apply what Toyota did in an actual manufacturer of a car to streamlining my process, regardless of what business you're in, right? You could be in tech, you could be in healthcare, it doesn't really matter. That leap is easy for some, and for others, it's hard. Matt and I have an example of one person in one of our sessions goes, I don't know why we just spent time doing this. We don't manufacture anything. We're like, we do software. This is stupid. So some people don't make that switch as quickly, but honestly, having also as being someone who's done all sorts of developmental activities, et cetera, I love this one. Every single time we do it, I'm like, I love seeing people's eyes just go, oh my God, wow.
Yeah.
So it's exciting.
Yeah. I mean, there's that excitement, the oh wow. And then sometimes people say, oh crap. And like they feel bad about discovering the waste or the opportunity.
Oh yeah.
I'd be curious to hear from either of you, either experiencing that and or coaching others through, almost like having to counsel them, like now that they're seeing the waste.
Well, I don't think we've had any nervous breakdowns, Pablo, but there have been some oh crap sort of moments. It's like, how could, kind of like Pablo said, how could we not do this? And I think if I do my job right with the simulation, people get the connection to their own work. And it's not about a car. It's about, hey, I got code that I'm, developing. I got to ship that code to someone else who then develops that and packages it and gets it out to the marketplace. They begin to see all those relationships, and they sort of lean in right away. Pardon the pun. And the reason that we do it to this day is because it does kind of wipe the slate clean. There's no real talking head PowerPoint. I don't beat anyone over the head with all kinds of lean or Japanese concepts. They just kind of at a very visceral level, get the difference between achieving far better results, 4 to 5x better results by thinking through high leverage points. And they see that application to their own business. And we are never without a target rich environment, so to speak. So plenty of targets to hit, and they kind of see it right away, and they're very excited to get going.
I think it also, Mark, we start with the simulation before we actually go into the workshop, right? So it also reduces the barriers for people because there's different people, different, organizational teams, different levels. And it gets them into the mode of like, wow, now I can't wait to go do this with our company. If that's what this company did, like, let's go apply the principles. So it's a good way to build some camaraderie, some team building before actually getting into the meat of the solving.
Yeah. So let's talk about the book and how your past experiences have led to this. The book again, What a Unicorn Knows. First off, the word unicorn, within startup circles or investment circles. I mean, I think Facebook is one that was considered a unicorn. What's meant by that term?
Pablo, take it away.
Yeah, so it was coined by Cowboy Ventures, and we'll use the term as it was defined by them, was any company, public or private, valued over $1 billion, right? And so typically now people sometimes say, well, hey, what startups are being valued at $1 billion versus public? But at the time, back in 13, 14, there were very few unicorns per se, right? So I think, that's sort of why the term is used. It's this magical, beast that is difficult to attain. Obviously, last year we saw the number of unicorns almost double year over year in terms of prior years, if not almost triple, just because valuations were, growing at different rates than before. It doesn't take away from the fact that the reason why we've called it, what a unicorn knows is, what do some of the best unicorns that have been out there, what do we see for those companies that are successful? How have they been able to drive sustainable growth to maintain that status and continue to grow effectively versus those that have not? So we wanted to share what those principles are, what people should be aspiring to if they want to build a sustainable business that has significant growth over time.
Mm-hmm. And
we're lucky.
Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I'd say we are quite fortunate in the fact that if you think about how most books are written, not every book, but many books, including ones that I've written, Mark, you've written, the sample size is quite small, and it's often sort of biased. We have this unbelievable playground, so to speak, of over 500 software companies, and to be able to say what separates the best from the rest, even among those, is something that very few people can do. Scholars don't have that. Most people have, at most maybe a dozen, couple fistfuls of companies that they can point to, cherry pick. That when you've got a huge sample size like that, and you can see patterns, you can take kind of this whole company perspective, overlaid with a lean mindset. And I think there's something to walk away with there that doesn't exist in the marketplace right now.
Yeah. So what, Pablo, you mentioned that Cowboy Ventures definition, follow-up question for you or Matt. I mean, what's your definition, or is there a consensus modern definition, or do you have one of your own that you prefer?
It's the same. I think it's either all public and private or just private, right? So I think sometimes when people say, well, what are the top unicorns today? Sometimes they meet the ones that have not gone public yet. But for the purposes of when we're making discussions or the book, we've stuck to the original definition just in case people are confused. So,
but as with anything, the question is, how do you get from here to there? And as you looked at those companies, I mean, where did that access come from? Were they companies that Insight Partners had invested in, or others in your network?
Yeah, it's a mix of both. To Matt's point, we've had the benefit at Insight of, minting over 75 plus unicorns ourselves. Matt and I have had the benefit of working in the public markets also with other public unicorns. So I think the experience of working both with those public companies and also the broad portfolio at Insight, but also working with non-Insight startup companies that are valued at $1 billion plus, because it's an ecosystem that we also work with as well. So I think those 3 data points have allowed us to triangulate what good looks like, and the pattern recognition that we have has helped us sort of form some of our, our basis for our opinions and facts.
So before reaching that state of unicorn, there's this progression that seemed to spell out and talk about in the book, going from startup, which could mean just barely off the ground, no customers yet, pre-revenue, to the scale up. So, I guess it brings us back to the question of, what do you mean by a scale up, and when does a startup get to the point where they might say, okay, scale up is now a better label?
There's some sort of standard definitions. I think you could probably just go on Wikipedia and they would give you a definition, something to the effect of, 20% growth past 3 years, that kind of thing. So it's essentially you have a company in a startup phase is looking for product market fit. Those in the scale up phase have found a product market fit. They're looking more for a go to market fit. Which is sort of where we come in. So they're growing rapidly. They're looking to scale, to grow even more. And what they're lacking is, because it's such a high velocity organization, really, looking for discipline Sometimes because to reach certain inflection points, if you don't have the scaffolding in place, then all that you've built is at risk of potentially crumbling, which is where we come in. And the fact that the go-to-market fit is probably the priority number one is right in our wheelhouse. So that's how we think about it.
Yeah.
And the final phase being grown up.
Grown up. So, Pablo, let me ask a follow-up question for you. There's probably a lot of entrepreneurs listening, but we might also have listeners who are more, coming from more traditional lean enterprise, lean manufacturing companies and roles. But let's say they have an idea. A lot of people say they have their dreams of the company they'd like to start. Can you kind of talk us through first, this idea of finding product market fit? Or, an example of, what it means to find that.
Yeah, absolutely. At its core, a founder, whether you're a technical founder or GTM founder, you've got an idea to build something. And so when you first build that, you might have a sense for who you're selling it to, what the value proposition is, what you're going to charge for it. But early on, you don't, right? You're just trying to test the waters of, where is it going to land and is there going to be demand for it, right? And it takes a couple of customers to try to understand, okay, am I successful selling to, enterprise customers or mid-market customers or SMB, small, medium businesses, right? Because you can be selling to different types of customers. Is it better sold to a certain vertical? Who's my actual buyer that's going to buy this at scale, right? So until you have a repeatable sales process, where there is clear demand for the product and people understand exactly what you're selling, you've sort of just got an idea and you're testing it, right? And so with the sort of lean concepts of constant experimentation, which is in our second chapter, when you don't have product market fit, that's basically what you're doing. You're testing the waters to see what sticks. Companies sometimes get product market fit early on. You could get to $1 million in revenue and have very strong product market fit and take off. You could get to 10 million and not necessarily have good product market fit, but there's demand for your product elsewhere, but you may not be able to scale past that, right? So it just depends, but really narrowing down your customer, your buyer, and building a repeatable motion is what gets you out of product market fit.
Yeah.
Or into product market fit, sorry.
Yeah. And then, is there still risk of companies making the mistake of trying to scale too quickly before they found product market fit, or investors just not making that possible, of not really funding someone to try to go big before they have that nailed, the product market fit?
Absolutely. Us as investors, so Insight typically invests when there is product market fit, right? And so our job, Matt and I and everybody who's on the operating side, because Insight Partners has the investors and then a team called Onsite, which is basically designed to help you scale once we make the investment, right? And absolutely, if you try to scale too quickly and you don't have product market fit, you will probably burn through a lot of your cash that you have on hand or debt that you have, just because you're not going to find that repeatable motion. You're going to stall, right? Which is why it's very important to get product market fit right, so you can start to build out your organization, products, et cetera.
Yeah. And then can you give an example or kind of walk through then that progression of finding go-to-market fit? What's the failure mode or the problem, if you will, of somebody not yet having the go-to-market fit?
Yeah. So let's pretend you've got a good product, and let's pretend you can sell it, broadly. I'll simplify it. There's three main routes to market, right? You can have a product-led motion, and there's tons of different product-led motions. Sometimes people think product-led just means I buy online and I don't need to talk to a human being, right? But there's a product-led motion which has a lot of elements. There's a sales-led motion, which is primarily direct. And then there's a channel-led motion, right? Indirect. So you're leveraging, for all intents and purposes, a value-added reseller, an Accenture, something like that. And so those are your routes to market in terms of how you would distribute your solution. There's nuances, obviously, to that, but that is also hard because people try to sometimes think, well, hey, I'm going to try and do all three of these. Well, your product may not be channel friendly and the channel may not actually value it to resell it for you or to help you, right? That's okay. Your product also may not have a PLG motion. That's okay. Or it may do great PLG, product-led growth. And now you want to take it direct or through the enterprise, but it's not enterprise ready, right? So you're selling to Pfizer, Fortune 500 company versus a 20-person company, very different sales motion, and they have different requirements, security, et cetera. So you've got to make sure your product also meets those needs. So getting that GTM go-to-market fit takes time, but it also is an evolution. You may introduce PLG very late, or you might introduce enterprise very late, or channel as you start to mature, as you start to go into different countries and markets that necessitate a different motion. So it's definitely a journey that never stops.
Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear.
It kind of lands us on the doorstep of strategy, if you think about it.
Yep.
And there are, and not to be critical, but there are tools out there, like, for example, and this is right to Pablo's point, tools out there that are widely in use, like say the business model canvas, where there's room on that canvas to talk about channels, to talk about customers, relationships with customers. And the problem with them is that they don't allow you to prioritize the best use of your resources, because you can't do everything that you want to do. Strategy is, and our very first principle is strategic speed, which is really the drivability of the vehicle we're calling a scale up, if you think about it. But you have to absolutely make choices on where you're going to focus your resources, and most importantly, where you are not. And tools like that are great as frameworks to begin the thinking process, especially perhaps at the startup phase. But when you are in your scale up and you've got investors, and you're trying to, have a sustainable competitive advantage against, daunting players in your space, disrupt them if you possibly can, you do need to think about strategy. And that's kind of our starting point.
Yeah. So I want to come back and talk more about that theme of constant experimentation. One kind of follow-up question, what you were just saying, Matt, or maybe, Pablo can chime in on it too. I mean, so you talk about being ready to scale, and investors know you have product market fit and you're scaling. Do investors want to hear about constant experimentation? Like, do they realize that's just how it is with companies at this stage? Or do they sometimes want more, if you will, certainty than a tolerance for that constant experimentation?
I think it depends. And I think that's why we exist, right? I mean, the investors are there to invest money and help you determine what the optimal, exit is going to be from a growth perspective. The operating teams that we have are there to help translate, hey, in order to get there, we might need to take these steps. We might need to test the waters, et cetera. Obviously, it's tough sometimes, right? Like if you keep failing on your experiments, you're going to get pressure on like, well, why are we wasting time doing this, right? If you have a track record, though, of failing and then turning those failures into successes, I think obviously you'll have more leeway with your investors and teams. So just be thoughtful, depending on who you are and who you're working with. The tolerance for experimentation and failure may drastically vary. Kind of like being a parent, right? Like kid takes a lot of risk, but ultimately nothing happens and they're okay. You're fine with it, right? If they're constantly always getting hurt, you're probably going to keep a tighter leash on them. So.
Yeah, and I would add to that there is a fine balance, I think, between being in constant beta mode and having a reliable motion for bringing a concept into commercialization.
Yeah.
And that's really the focus of constant experimentation. It's not because it's fun to experiment in a lab that we call a business. It's because if you do not, and you begin to grow and scale and you ride on your past success, it won't be long before you are struggling in the marketplace. Competitors are eating your lunch, if not you for lunch. And it's just a competitive imperative to do that. But it does need to be business related. So I think a lot of people make a mistake in thinking about experimentation as what we learned in 7th grade science, where you're trying to, prove or disprove some universal truth. Here, we're talking about business experimentation, where the factors of success and what determines, failure and success is around business dynamics, the business indicators. It's revenue, right? It's cost. It's all the drivers of a business. And that, I think, sometimes gets lost in all of the make nice, continuous improvement stuff, and never forget the genetics of continuous improvement, right? It came about in wartime. So, and we're in a war right now, right? Every company that we work with is feeling under the gun, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So, you talk about this constant experimentation, and, you could see that being the culture in a startup. Toyota at different stages there, I think, including some of that history you're alluding to, was a startup. I mean, when they first entered the car business, that was a startup on top of the old weaving loom business. And then, like you said, after the war, maybe they were, restarting in different ways. As a company grows, one thing you write about is, it's a phrase I've heard from Toyota people: big company syndrome. Or I've heard it called big company disease, of avoiding that or not wanting that to set in. I mean, what have you learned, Matt, either from the Toyota experience or experience working with other organizations? How do you help guide the leaders of an organization to not lose that startup-y, scale-up-y, constant experimentation as they become a grown-up company?
It's not losing sight of the fact that innovation needs to be a strategic priority, a company priority at the very top. If a leader loses that focus and says, man, our product, just don't break it. It's working so well. Let's ride this wave as long as we can. It is a death knell, because what happens is experimentation and the engine being experimentation of innovation now gets, put to the side. And then as the company grows, costs balloon. And, there's more people now, and gosh, the product is the same. So, well, how am I going to justify my existence? Well, I got to come up with a program, and I got to sell it to the leaders, right? And that costs money, and those programs proliferate. And then all of a sudden, gosh, the product is now a little bit obsolete. It's a little bit old, looking long in the tooth. We've lost the chops on how to experiment and how to innovate. And all of a sudden the costs have to be cut back, and there's a freeze on all the programs. And all of a sudden you're at a standstill. So it begins at the leader level. And one of the portfolio companies that we work with has actually made their business about constant experimentation at scale. Right. So we have an interview there with the CEO of a company that is their business, is helping other tech companies experiment. So,
I mean, what are your thoughts here, Pablo? Guidance that you would give the companies that are further on their way or have already become a unicorn? How do they not lose that experimental mindset?
Yeah, I would say, and I apologize because I do think I'll say something that might upset some people. I think it all comes down to leadership at some point, right? I don't think any principles or Matt coming in to do a workshop or a book will make certain human beings want to innovate or do things differently, right? So it's one about making sure people are aware of the principles, but if you don't have the right leader in place or leaders to lead initiatives or that think that way and truly believe in wanting to be innovative and challenge the status quo, I think you will fall into big company syndrome, which is why that term sort of exists, right? And I've been part of 2 public companies. And again, as companies get larger and larger, the organizations are larger, and you've got, if you think about a startup to scale up, it's a small group. They move fast. Decisions are made quickly. Everything is about innovation because you don't have time. Otherwise you get eaten up. But as you get larger, we're all human beings. We fall into habits of, processes and stuff, but there are sparks of innovation in every single company, regardless of the size. The key is finding those people, enabling them, moving leaders around that can help drive that energy. But I do think leadership above all else will enable the success of innovation.
Well, it seems like, not to be too flippant about it, but to your spark analogy, a lot of organizations are designed in a way as if like they're intentionally trying to put out those sparks when they,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, it's true. And that's why you've also got to have leaders that are politically savvy enough that won't try to, they can't be bulls in a china shop coming in trying to be like, yeah, I'm going to innovate, because that's not how organizations also work, right? So there needs to be some finesse there to get the organization. And again, back to Matt's point around constant experimentation, if you try to drive innovation in the entire company, that's never going to happen, right? So experiment first with a small team or a smaller product and demonstrate that you can drive innovation to sort of have it proliferate.
There's a great excerpt in the book here. I'm going to kind of paraphrase part of it, but talking about even pointing back to Toyota, current day Toyota, not startup Toyota, that they run over 1 million experiments annually. A vast majority don't need more than their immediate supervisor's permission or involvement to run a test. It seems like, back to characteristics of certain leaders, it seems like if a leader, a founder, a leader on some level is just sort of a control freak, they're not going to be comfortable with this idea of, if you will, unauthorized experiments taking place. And I don't know, to your point, Pablo, I don't know if you can convince someone to change their mind if they're so locked in on that idea that I need to approve everything.
I don't think you can. And again, I'll be extreme in my views here, even though the world is not black and white, it's always gray. That kind of leader, this won't work, right? So do you have to replace that leader? Maybe, maybe not. It just depends what you're trying to accomplish. But maybe you don't try your innovative ideas there and you try them somewhere else. But over time, I think people will see, well, why are people on Sally's team driving innovation and they seem to be able to do experiments and challenge the status quo, and I'm over here on Johnny's team and he's controlling everything? Well, maybe I want to go to Sally's team, right? So over time, innovation wins, but you can't force it head on all the time.
That's actually a very good point. If you come directly at innovation and you do something to the tune of, and pardon the pun, the old song, come on, people get together, everybody love one another. Come on, everybody get creative, innovative. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And that's why there is a reason we put constant experimentation as subordinate to strategy, because if your strategy is set correctly, and you are setting priorities and goals against that strategy that are of a stretch nature, that demand resourcefulness, different thinking, you can't not innovate, right? So that's kind of the ideal, is to make sure that, like when we do our process optimization work, and even strategy work, we're not shooting for a 10% improvement, a 5% improvement, even a 15% improvement. We start, north of 20, 25% as the bogey, because we know from experience that anything lower than that, you're going to fall back into the gravitational pull of the way that we've always done it. And we'll just stay longer. We're going to work a little bit harder, but we're not really going to change much. And that's just big companies. And I think we call in the book innovation anemia. It's just weak sauce.
So Pablo, I was going to ask you to talk a little bit about what you mean by not just a scale up, but a lean scale up, how that's influenced by what you talk about in the book as being, a lean process, if you will.
Yeah. So, we're obviously working with all kinds of scale ups. And again, depending on where you join in the podcast, startups are very early stage, companies. Scale ups is that next sort of teenager phase. And then grown-ups are, you're graduating to sort of public company status. When we talk about lean scale up, it's companies that are leveraging lean principles to grow in a sustainable way, right? So do they have a sound strategy and they know where to play, where not to play, right? Are they constantly evaluating their processes to streamline them, remove waste, et cetera? So we're looking for, to touch on the point before around having the right leaders, we won't engage with our portfolio companies unless it's the right leadership team that is bought in. Because to Matt's point, we've had experiences prior to Insight where sounds like a great idea, let's try this out, but there really isn't buy-in, and then the project just sort of like falters, right? And so we want to be very focused on, is the CEO bought in, right? Do they think that this is going to have clear outcomes? Have they set goals that they want to achieve that we think are, achievable but unrealistic also to sort of push people? And are we going to have support, right? After we do the engagement, are they going to see it through and continue to drive it? The most successful companies take the work that we've done. So when Matt does his workshop, and make it part of the culture. So it's not a one and done. It's, hey, I want to build a PMO office now, a project management office now to help me do this internally. And Matt's done a good job of training the trainer at some of the portfolio companies. So that's what we mean by a lean scale-up, is those companies that are sort of embodying the basics of lean and just leveraging it to grow more effectively.
One of the nice, I would call it a luxury, Mark, in the lean work, because oftentimes process improvement isn't at, as I referred to before, the pointy end of the spear, which is revenue impact, right? A lot of it is cost focused. What I love about the work that Pablo and I get to do is we're working with the sales and marketing motion, where every time we do this, we calculate what's at risk revenue wise, productivity wise, but more importantly, what's at risk if we continue doing things the way that we are doing? Nothing gets management or the board's attention more than if you start talking about revenue. And that is a luxury. And that helps propel any kind of capability transfer. You're not trying to push water uphill, so to speak. It's like, wow, there's $17 million that's getting pushed in revenue. What the heck? And if you're telling me if you just tweak this one little step just a bit, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, that I can capture that back and even do a little bit better, I'm all in. Oh, and I'm not going to have to spend any more in terms of headcount. I don't need any fancy systems investment. This is just doing things a little bit differently. Like, yep, okay, I'm in. So. But that is the part that I think a lot of lean literature and lean initiatives lack, is the fact that they're not revenue facing, and we come directly at that sales process. And a lot of companies, Toyota included, don't let you don't talk about or touch the sales process.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask another question about lean process, or even just this word process. Like the little bit I've been around Agile circles or some startup conferences, I've heard people really poo-poo process. They like this aversion to the word. And when I've had a chance to talk to people, there's almost this assumption that process means like inflexible, that process is bad. So I'd be curious, Pablo, in different settings, I mean, do you run across this where people think sales process sounds bad, or is it just a matter of the detail, like how making sure the process isn't too rigid?
I think it's in the detail, and it's definitely in making sure it's not rigid. Because if you think about it, if I'm a sales rep, I want the process to be simple. I'm trying to sell something. I don't want to have 20 forms to sign and get this person's approval and go to use this tool, and then to get paid, I got to do X, Y, Z, right? So for us, it's all about having process is important, but making that process as simple as possible, not only for the rep, right, for the person making the sale, but also for the customer. A lot of the work we've done is also the customer doesn't want to be sending contracts back and forth 10 times. Like, why am I sending it? Well, it's got to go to this department and this department. They don't care, right? They want it simple. And so the beauty is just the simplification of the process, however cumbersome it may be, because they're all cumbersome, right? Which ultimately, to Matt's point, results in reduction in time to value, which is better for the customer because they get to use your solution, and it's better for the business because they're recognizing revenue that much quicker.
Yeah, I mean, those are familiar themes of reducing waste, making it easier for people to do their job, whether they're on an assembly line or in an operating room or selling software, and make it easy for the customer to do business with you. I mean, those also pretty core lean principles. Yeah.
Yeah. And especially in today's environment where, I mean, everybody's read the news, right? Where there's reductions in force. And so if I have two less people working on a process, well, then I hope to God that process has gotten simplified because I don't have enough people to do the cumbersome process before, right? So not that you should be doing this when there's a time in crisis. And Matt's been great to talk about lean, and the companies that have done really well are those that are constantly thinking about how to do this, whether it's a boom or a, harsh economic condition, right? Because those that, when we're in a bull market, are always experimenting and thinking how to get better are the ones that can scale more effectively.
Fun fact. And this is something I think, I don't know if Pablo, you agree, but I think one of the more innovative things that we've ever done together is to bring some sales teams together in cross-functional teams and include, for example, chief legal counsel in the Kaizen sessions. And interestingly enough, because oftentimes, and nothing against attorneys, but in the sales process can be gatekeepers, and those constant revisions to a sales contract can slow things down. Salespeople hate paperwork. I got to work a few months in an automotive retail dealership when I was at Toyota, and gosh, the paperwork is drowning. Mm-hmm. But that lawyer turned out to be sort of the champion internally to this is such a great new process. This is like, wow, this actually saves me time and work. Wow. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, Pablo, if you think that's one of the more creative, innovative strokes.
No, I agree. That's why we include as broad of a cross-functional team, because sometimes you're surprised as to who actually understands why we did something a certain way and goes, well, gee, maybe you're right. We shouldn't be doing it that way. Right. Like, so we love having a very broad participation rate when we do these sessions.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to lean process, one phrase you used in the book, it was a new phrase to me. I've heard the 3 words, and I feel like I know 2 of the 3 words pretty well, but a lean Kaizen sprint. So I know sprint.
Which 2 are the ones that you know well?
The word, well, this feels like I'm setting a trap for myself. But I mean, the words lean and Kaizen, I think I have a decent understanding of. The word sprint, I have heard. I've never participated in a quote unquote sprint when it comes to, say, software development. So let's just turn it back to the question of what is a lean Kaizen sprint?
It's sort of, maybe you're more familiar, Mark, with a word like Jishuken. Or something like that. So it just really is, it's a little bit of marketing on our part, to be honest with you. But one of the things that we've done is to make sure that these sessions don't run beyond like a 6-hour window. Okay. So we're not in weeks long sessions. There are a lot of Kaizen events that, even though they're called sprints, could be more like a design sprint or a product sprint, which are typically 2 weeks. If you read the Google material, they got it down to 5 days. But our sprint is almost like 100-meter dash, to be honest with you. So inside of a 6-hour period of time, we will have multiple teams working simultaneously on sometimes the same targets, sometimes different targets, but we will emerge from that 6 hours with a fully blown experimental test of a solution after having mapped out the process, decided on a problem, calculated the impact, 5-wide it, come up with a countermeasure or solution, new process tweak, step, what have you, thought through what would have to be in place for it to be successful. And here's our hypothesis, here's our experiment, and here's how quickly it's going to be done and who's going to own it. And they're off and running. Mm-hmm. That is not, I don't think, a traditional way of thinking about Kaizen in general. So, lack of a better word, that feels like a sprint. The actual working time is literally under 5 hours. And the rest is sort of readout. And we've translated that into the remote version as well. So during COVID, I ran Kaizen sessions and sprints in 3-hour blocks. Nobody wants to sit for 6 hours, but still you cover a lot of ground in a big hurry, but in a disciplined and standardized way. So
Yeah. But with the sprint, I mean, and like, personally, I don't use Kaizen to mean Kaizen event. When I mean Kaizen event, I say Kaizen event because there are small Kaizen improvements. But then what you're talking about with the sprint, this is definitely not the classic 5-day Kaizen event.
Correct. And, think about it. Almost all of our work, 99.99% of our work in the last couple of years is with software development companies. So and they're B2B, right? So when you are trying to, whether you're talking about the sales process or the post-sales process, there is a sales cycle. And we're trying to come up with a fix for that, trying to shrink time to revenue, shrink time to value, shrink onboarding time, implementation time. I think in one case, we took 66% out of the implementation time, but that takes a while to actually work through the system in terms of the experiment itself. But the thinking part, boom, get it done inside of a day, because you're dealing with salespeople. Taking people out of the sales role is always a struggle and is always not the easiest thing to do. So you got to make it tight. You got to make it exciting. You got to make it different and involve them in the fix. And then, so that's why we call it that.
Okay. And I am going to admit, instead of going to Wikipedia, I went to the Lean Enterprise Institute Lean Lexicon. Jishiken is a word that I've heard, but I don't normally use. So that means basically like a hands-on learning workshop. Would you agree with the Lean Lexicon definition of that, at least in a couple of words?
The practical, yeah. So it's sort of like an OODA loop, like what a fighter pilot would do, mixed with a continuous improvement process. But the way it played out, at least in my experience at Toyota, is there is something of a critical nature that needs to be addressed. And so you pull together a special group of masters, so to speak, and you work around the clock until it gets fixed. Sometimes that's 24, 36 hours without sleep, believe it or not. So that's the effect that I'm trying to bring to our work without having to ask anyone to work over 6 hours.
Pablo, I'm not asking you to defend sales, but to chime in on the perspective of like what are your thoughts on applying the sort of rapid experimentation to sales process?
Yeah, it's been tough originally, right? Because Matt's right. You tell a sales leader and a CEO, I need X number of salespeople out of the field for a day and a half, and they're like, it's a day and a half of not selling, right? Mm-hmm. But when you say, hey, we plan to take out 20%, 25%, 30%, and that results in $10 million more in revenue, et cetera, it's worth it. And to Matt's point, you're breaking it up into easy chunks. I think when people have come out of it, they go, wow, this was great. Thanks. Again, remember, I'm part of the process, right? I am the solution. I'm not just sitting in a workshop being told, hey, we're going to fix this for you. Like, I'm asking you to come and solve a problem in your job. So, having now done this so many times, people love it. They love being part of it. And when the MVP then turns into a success, of course they love it because it impacts their job.
Mm-hmm. All right. So before we wrap up, we've been joined again by Matt May and Pablo Dominguez. The book is over Matt's shoulder. I'll hold up a copy here. What a Unicorn Knows: How Leading Entrepreneurs Use Lean Principles to Drive Sustainable Growth. And I think it's just fascinating to see, these dots get connected between Toyota and startups and companies at different stages in between. The final question I wanted to ask and hear a little bit from each of you about esprit de corps, or building team spirit, and like lessons that come from Toyota or even other good examples of having that team spirit. How would you describe it? Maybe Matt, let me ask you first, and then Pablo. Like what do you draw on from Toyota that's transferable in terms of esprit de corps?
Toyota struggled with this. I'll be quite candid. Their management style is it's the best way to put it. They were casting about looking for other models, and one of them happened to come from an unlikely source, but it came from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory I'm in California, Pasadena, California, part of NASA. And there was a gentleman who was a project team leader for Mars Pathfinder who had written a book called High Velocity Leadership. Regular guest. coming in to talk to University of Toyota sessions. And I learned a lot, and he had this grease and glue model of leadership. And it just always, pardon the pun, stuck with me. Mm-hmm. And most of the principles we talk about in the book before Esprit de Corps are really about the grease part of it. How do you remove the stuff that is getting in the way of value to a customer? So whether it's friction, whether it's waste, whether it's inertia, whether it's drag, all of the things that any physical body, organization or otherwise meets in trying to move ahead. But there needs to be something that holds them all together. And we're also fortunate enough to, Pablo and I, to be associated with the gentleman who actually introduced me to Pablo, who has a military background. And staying in military, because if you think about Esprit de Corps, almost all the work that has been done research-wise focuses on military or paramilitary organizations. That team spirit, that, my brother is in the trench next to me kind of spirit. And he comes from a military background, and they have a saying, mission first, people always. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing to me in spending time with him, and he has a nice interview in our book toward the end of the book, was that the way that you develop people is actually the opposite of mission first, people always. You develop the people first so that they can accomplish the mission. So it's a nice duality that I actually didn't realize. And if you look at all of the leadership research that has been done recently, it will show you that those that are results focused, which is kind of, we think about the military, that's what we think about, right? Give me the results. It's a mission, get it accomplished. But when they juxtapose that with leaders that also have sort of the softer side, the empathic side, the grease part of keeping people together, the relationship side, they're viewed as a leader 70% more effective than those that are just results oriented. And I got to learn a lot from this gentleman. And so all I'll say here is that when it comes to Esprit de Corps, we think about the individual first, their values. Are they connected to the values of the company? Is there a people culture fit? So we've talked about product market fit. We've talked about go-to-market fit. And the bookend to all of this is people culture fit. Because without that, at the end of the day, what are you, right? Because a company isn't anything more than a collection of human beings. So we had to have that element in there. It's what keeps things together, and that's about all I can really say. I am not a leadership guru. By any means, I don't think Pablo would say that he is a guru, but he is a leader. And I think he sort of understands that mission first, people always, and you develop it in the opposite direction. And Pablo, you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah. So Pablo, let me turn it to you maybe for the last word on this of building team spirit, either within sales or even like more broadly. I know sometimes things get dysfunctional within a company. There's finger pointing across different functions, especially, let's say, the tech side of a company and the customer facing side of a company. That doesn't happen at KaiNexus, by the way. So that's not who I'm thinking of. I'm wearing their shirt. I just want to be clear. That is not at all that previous organizations have been around. But let me bring it back to the question, Pablo. Like your thoughts on Esprit de Corps, either within sales or more broadly.
Yeah, I will echo everything Matt said. I'll give you an analogy. I don't row, but if you look at university rowing teams, you could argue that if you applied lean principles, you've got the fastest boat, the lightest boat, you've done the mechanics, your oars are perfect. But think about what happens. Like all that is useless if you don't have the people that are rowing on the boat with the person telling them how to row, rowing in unison and working together, right? All it takes is one person's oar not to be rowing, and it doesn't matter the efficiency of the boat, et cetera, or the quality of the water, et cetera. So it's tough. Organizations are living, breathing things, right? Because they're made up of humans with egos. And so to Matt's point, there will always be friction. There will be drag. There will be inertia. And I think the job of a leader is to minimize that and bring people together. And so it is the glue, the Esprit de Corps. Without that, honestly, nothing I think would work. And back to our point around having the right leaders in place, that honestly makes the entire difference. Without the right leaders or the leader, you are not going to be able to drive change, whether it's this change or something else. So absolutely extremely critical.
And I'm going to embarrass Pablo right now and just tell him and you that if you had to ask me what Pablo's superpower is, it's building a team. There's a healthy percentage of people on our team that have followed him at his request, obviously, through the same number of iterations of his career that I have. So probably a third of the company are folks that I've worked with and folks in our portfolio companies. So if he knows whereof he speaks when it comes to this, far better than I ever will.
Thank you, Matt.
Well, thank you, Matt and Pablo, for being here today. Matt May, Pablo Dominguez. The book again is What a Unicorn Knows: How Leading Entrepreneurs Use Lean Principles to Drive Sustainable Growth. I'll put all sorts of links in the show notes to Matt's past episodes, the book, Insight Partners. And we were talking about it just briefly before we started recording, Matt and I, 2009, little conversation about Twitter. That's still on YouTube. Early days of Twitter. Let's not do another podcast about Twitter these days.
Yeah, at least don't send it to Elon.
Well, again, thank you for being here, and thank you everyone for listening. Really enjoyed it, Pablo. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
For links and more information about Matt, Pablo, their company, their new book, and more, you can look in the show notes or go to leanblog.org/469.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.